taught students public speaking skills, and part of it is, of course, making eye contact, but forgive me if I don't make much eye contact. First of all, I'd like to thank all you guys for being here. Everyone in this room has played a role in our family, and I really appreciate the role you played. Everyone in here has shown some degree of support, care, concern, thoughts, prayers, and actions in helping remember and be there for my dad, and especially my mom. And the Emmanuel community has been an integral part of our life for a long time, especially my mom's life, mine as well, but especially my mom. And being 3,000 miles away in California, there were times where I couldn't do much. And knowing that she had the support of everyone in this room meant a lot to me. And it's a testament to how great of a community we live in, and how great of a community Emmanuel Presbyterian Church is. So, in 33 years, I swear I've never saw my dad cry. I'm trying to remind myself he'd probably be disappointed in me right now. I swear I never saw him cry in 33 years. So I sincerely thank everyone in this room, especially Emmanuel Presbyterian, who have been there primarily for my mother. And it means a lot to me, and I thank you for it from the bottom of my heart. My dad was a great man. He was not a perfect man, but he was a great man. He was a tough man. He was a very strong man. I must have inherited my emotional side from my mom. Because my dad was the sort of old school guy that if you asked him to do something, he wouldn't say how hard it was going to be or cite the challenges. He would just say, when do you need it done? And he would do it before that date. He always got the job done, no matter what hindrances stood in his way. He knew how to build things. He knew how to fix everything. As you can see, our house is falling apart without him. He was the sort of man who lived by morals and ethics. He always said what he meant. He never told a lie. He was meticulous. He was diligent. He was responsible, and he was accountable. He and I did not always have your perfect story-tale father-son relationship. You wouldn't often find us playing catch out in front or going on ski trips together. But we understood each other, and I always loved him. And I know that he always loved me and my mom. And there's nothing a man like my dad wouldn't do for someone that he loved. And many people are in this room are those people that David Fox would have done anything for, absolutely anything, include give his life, if necessary. A testament to how much I know he loved me is all the things he taught me. Whether he was doing it intentionally at times or not, my dad taught me how to be trustworthy, how to be loyal, how to work hard, how to never expect anything that I didn't earn, and how to always be honest, be where I said I would be, do what I said I would do, and take responsibility for my actions. As he would say, you gotta pay the piper. I heard that phrase all too often when I was growing up. I had to pay the piper. I had to reap what I sowed. And my dad was the sort of man that the reason he was able to teach me all those valuable lessons is because he lived that way. That's what he did. He was cool enough to give me a BB gun when I was 7 years old. And that might strike some of you as being a little young to give a boy a BB gun. However, it must be told that he made me read 7 books on gun safety as a 7-year-old. And then he drafted quizzes and ultimately a final test. And I could only get the BB gun, a Red Ryder, which I still own today. I could only get that BB gun if I read those books, passed his quizzes and tests. And you betcha, I read every word of those books, and luckily I passed his quizzes and tests. And that BB gun still means the world to me today. There is a story that epitomizes my dad. He was adventurous, he was patriotic, he would never turn down a challenge, and he was also funny. and there is a story that some of you may have already heard before, but I would venture to say most of you probably have not. So bear with me and pardon the redundancy if you have heard it before. But when my dad was in college at the University of California, Berkeley, he was, of course, because he ended up leading any organization he was ever in, he was the president of his fraternity, Alpha Tau Omega. And one day, sitting around the fraternity house in the early 1960s, my dad and his friends, and I must surmise that there might have been some beers involved, decided that it'd be a good idea to go down to the local laundromat and ride around in dryers. I mean, why not? Why not? Now, for anyone younger than my father's generation, it must be noted that these dryers are not today's cost-effective, energy-efficient, small little dryers. These are some big, monstrous dryers, big enough that a grown man could get in and, for whatever reason, ride around and bump his head up and down and bump around and heat up, and Lord knows why. But they decided to do it. They went down and did it, and they had fun. And next thing you know, riding around in dryers became a fad. And it became quite popular, and enough people were doing it that they actually had a name for it. You know, this is the 1960s, it's the Cold War, there's the space race between the United States and the Soviets. So you got astronauts, laundromat, thus laundronauts. So, as he always did, my dad became a leader, and he kind of led the laundronauts and helped found some of the rules. Of course, everything had to be about rules. I'm sure he had them written on a note card in his pocket. But one of the rules of being a laundromat was, you know, whoever spun the most revolutions won, and then you could have it cracked to let some of the heat out, because obviously it would get hot in there. And then you were allowed one piece of protective equipment, and only one. It would be a helmet. It could be a football helmet, could be a hockey helmet, could be whatever kind of helmet, but you needed a helmet, and there was nothing else. No protective equipment, no cushions, and my dad said he had to kick many cheaters out of that little league because they tried to stuff padding in their shirts and everything. And my dad, of course, would never, ever cheat. He was the most honest man I've ever known. And so it caught on so big that one day they had a competition, and they had to get one of their pre-law students to draft a very litigious contract, take it down to the laundromat owner, and essentially allow them to hold a competition of dryer riding, laundronauting, in his laundromat. And in return, they guaranteed him some publicity, which I'm sure he got. Though, as my dad would say, had the laundromat owner known how many people might regurgitate in his machines, he might have reconsidered signing that contract. But nonetheless, the laundromat owner signed the contract, and sure enough, they have this competition. And there are multiple participants. I sure wish he was around to get more of the specifics, but it sounded like dozens of participants and hundreds of spectators. The laundromat was full. There were people lining the glass windows looking in. There were news reporters there. It was a big deal. We still have a video clip of it somewhere. There was the media there. The sorority girls served as cheerleaders and scorekeepers, counting the revolutions, walking around with signs like who had the most. And the Guinness Book of World Records even sent a representative there to document it. And sure enough, wouldn't you know, my dad won the world record of spinning around most revolutions in a dryer. He is a world record holder, even though they later took it back because they made it illegal, so you can't have an illegal record. But he was the official world record setter of riding around in a dryer, and he said that when he was asked if he could have gone longer, he said, "Of course I can. I just waited until the other guy had left, and then I stopped. But of course I could have." My dad had, as my Uncle Richard and I were talking about yesterday, an iron stomach, and he said he could have just kept going afterwards. Well, you might think the story ends there, but it does not. Because after being the UC Berkeley College Alpha Tau Omega president student who set the world record for riding around in a dryer, aka laundronauting, he was sitting around the fraternity house, and he got a letter one day from Germany. And it was written in German, and of course my dad did not speak German. So he found a German studying friend of his, had him translate it, and the letter said very simply, "Come to the airport on this day, this time, and we've heard about you. You know, we've heard about you, the UC Berkeley student, and come to the airport at this day and time, and there will be and I double-checked with Richard, we're pretty sure it was a first-class ticket, not just a ticket, but a first-class ticket to Germany." And a lot of people, Cold War, 1960s, might have been a little daunted to go to Germany, having no idea why, having no idea from whom this letter was. It's not like today where you can just look it up and check things on Google. But knowing my dad, he could never turn down an adventure or a challenge. And so he grabbed his football helmet, he grabbed his suitcase. He didn't tell his parents, my Granny and Grandpa, and he set out. And sure enough, he got to the airport. There was a ticket in his name. He flew to Germany, and when he arrived, sure enough, there's a man in a nice suit holding a placard that says David Fox. So he goes up to the man and says, "Hi, I'm David Fox, but I still have no idea why I'm here. What am I doing?" And the guy says, "No English, come. And in the 1960s in Germany, this is a tricky place. So my dad follows the guy, because again, he's not going to back down to anything. And he gets in this nice car. I forget, I would have to ask him again if it was a limo or a nice Cadillac or something, but a nice car. And they start driving, and they leave Berlin, and they start going down these dark, forested roads, these windy woods roads. And of course, as my dad would say when he told the story, he's starting to think, all right, they heard about this stupid college American kid, and they just want to off me, like they just out of principle, these commies might want to get rid of me. Luckily, that was not the case, and the dark wooded roads eventually open up to this big auditorium-looking thing that's out in the middle of nowhere in Germany. And as he gets up, he says, "Where are we? What are we doing?" And the driver just points to the building and says, English. All right. So he grabs his suitcase, grabs his football helmet, walks into the building, and sure enough, there is a man there, and he does speak English, and he explains to my dad that they actually are representatives, high-ranking representatives of a German laundry machine manufacturing company. And they've heard about all this crazy business over in America, and they've heard that he set the world record for riding around in a laundry machine, and that they have invited him, all expenses paid, which he did not know as of this point, but they have invited him, all expenses paid, to come across the world and to break that record in their machine in Germany. Now, of course, my dad did not hesitate. I would hesitate only to say, anyone who knows my dad well can imagine what his face looked like and how his voice sounded when he said, and he looked the man in the eye, knowing full well he could be taken out back and disappeared. But he looked the man in the eye and he said, "This is an American record, and I'm not going to break it on foreign soil." And if you know him well, you know exactly how he'd say it. And he would have given that man quite the look. Luckily, the man was amenable to that and said, "All right, well, will you at least ride around a few hundred times?" And my dad said, "Yes, I will." And he requested that for the show aspect of it, which my dad didn't even know what was going on yet, really, other than riding around in a dryer, but he said, it's going to be quite the show. Will you look tired? Will you look like it's really beating you up? Will you look like it's strenuous? My dad said, "Sure, whatever you want." They sprayed some water on his head to make it look like he was sweating. But then these curtains open up. My dad straps on his football helmet. These curtains open up. And they must not have had much to do in Germany in the 1960s, because he said there were hundreds, maybe thousands of people in this auditorium cheering, and staring at a stage with nothing on it but a dryer. He walks out, he gets in the dryer, they start spinning it around, crowd's going wild, watching my dad ride around in a dryer, wearing his little football helmet. They had a, kind of beautiful girl walking around, counting the revolutions, and my dad said, he kept track. For the first time ever, he was keeping count in his head of the revolutions, just in case they tried to cheat him, and inadvertently allow the miscount to get to the world record, and then tell him, "Oh, you didn't break it," and be like, "You broke it." So my dad kept complete track of that count, while he's spinning around banging in the dryer. That would be pretty difficult. That would take some mental fortitude, which is what my dad had a lot of. And the MC, this is something Richard and I were talking about yesterday, and we confirmed this was the language. The MC would occasionally come by, and the door was cracked a little bit to say, "And how are you doing, Mr. Fox?" And he's spinning around, wearing his helmet in the dryer, rotating, and he goes, "I'm just fine." And sure enough, that's exactly what he would have said. So it ends, he acts like he's tired. Oh, they asked him to sway, and he's like, "Oh," and all these engineers run up. "How does our dryer compare to the American dryers? What's the heat like? Is it bumpier? Does it spin faster?" So my dad answered, because of course there's the kind of East-West competition back then, so they wanted to know how their stuff compared to America. And so when all that was said and done, they let him go on an all-expense-paid trip, and I confirmed this with Richard, to multiple European cities. He got to go to France, Paris, France, got to go to Rome, got to go to a bunch of cities after this whole endeavor. What an adventure. I sure wish I could have been on it with him. That would have been fun. But so here's where the story ends. He's sitting at the airport. He has just started laundronauting, set the world record, gone to Germany, denied breaking the record there, done some hundreds of revolutions, made them happy, sitting at the airport after quite an adventure. And he's in Germany, about to set off to either Paris or Rome. And there's a German man sitting next to him. And of course, my dad would not pack his football helmet because he was a very space efficient sort of guy. And it was very efficient to have it just separate as opposed to taking up all this unnecessary space in an otherwise packed suitcase. You should see the way he packed. It was the most efficient thing I've ever seen. So he's got his football helmet in his lap. He's got his suitcase to his side. He's sitting at the airport bar in Germany, having a drink before the flight. And a German guy next to him, big guy, he said, no, big German guy looks at him, looks at his suitcase, looks at his football helmet, kind of looks him up and down and says, race car driver? And as my dad would say much better than I thought about telling him that I'm an American college student who actually rides around in dryers and set a world record and got asked to come out to Germany to break the record and denied doing so, but still ran a few hundred revolutions, and now I'm just going on an all-expense paid throughout Europe trip because of my riding in a dryer. But instead I said, yeah, race car. And that story, I swear, I heard my dad say that story. I mean, I'm 33, and I probably first recollect it when I was 6 or 7, and it never changed. I heard it dozens of times, and I had a friend once say, you should really film your dad telling that story. And I said, that's a great idea, and unfortunately we never got the chance, but it's a great story. He told it better than I, but it summarizes my dad. Another quick story is, my dad wasn't a touchy-feely sort of guy, but he always knew what needed to be said. He always knew what you needed to hear. So, long story short, when I was in high school playing lacrosse, I was captain of the team, I loved it, I was invested in it. We had a game where we were supposed to get wiped the field with. We were supposed to get destroyed by the best team in the league. We were good, but we were playing the number 1 team, and they were supposed to really run up and down. Well, we ended up only losing 17-15. We were up at halftime, 11-10. I'll never forget it. I mean, it was a pivotal moment of my athletic career. And that team would go on to win the state championship, which we knew if we won that game, we would have, because the team that they faced in the state championship was not very good. And we were devastated. When the buzzer went off and we lost 17-15, we literally, those of us on the field, fell to the ground on our knees, and most of us were covered in sweat and dirt, and many of us, including myself, had blood. And it was a serious moment. I'll never forget it. It was a devastating loss. And after the game, when we took that quiet, tear-filled bus ride home, I got home, and my dad hadn't said anything to me. He hadn't really come up and hugged me. He didn't console me. That just wasn't his style. But I got home, and I saw something taped to the door. And I have never let it too far from my sight since. And I still have it. This was the piece. I had folded his tape over because I wouldn't let anything damage it. But it says, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself in a worthy cause, who, at the best, knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat." And that's a Teddy Roosevelt quote that my dad taped up to my door. And you bet your butt, I had it memorized by morning. And that's just the kind of way my dad was. That moment meant the world to me, because I sat outside for a few minutes just reading it over and over and over again. Because it helped me understand the feelings. And that's the sort of man my dad was. He was always in the arena. He would never say no, If you needed something from him, he would do it. And most of the time he won. But if he lost, as rare as that may have been, he learned from it. And he knew that having tried hard, played hard, even if he lost, was better than not playing at all, and better than not trying at all. That's how he lived. And that's how, he tried to raise me, and I continue to try to implement that kind of mentality in my life. But he knew what to say, how to say it, even if it wasn't spoken. He just knew what you needed to hear. Last thing I'm gonna say is one more very, very, very brief story. But we got into a fight one time, a little dispute, nothing crazy. I was much younger at that point. I was entering adolescence, and Lord knows people often quarrel with their parents in the adolescent years. And my dad and I had a dispute. I was about 12, 13, something like that. And we'd had a dispute, and sure enough, my dad walked away in the other direction. I walked away in the other direction, just both kind of get our cool. And of course, when I get back to my door, there's another quote taped up against it. And this quote was from Mark Twain. And Mark Twain said, "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be a man of 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years." Now, I got the point. I got it. But within a few days, my dad had asked, "Do you get the quote?" I got it. Yeah, I know. The old man doesn't learn anything. And the boy, when he becomes a man, realizes that his old man was right about more things than he thought. Yeah, exactly. Good. Well, David Fox, you're a great man. Like that Mark Twain quote says, "I'm astonished by how much I learned from you. You will be missed. Our lives, our home, and our whole town won't be the same without you. I learned a lot from you, and I will continue to teach my students, and more importantly, my daughter, the lessons that you taught me, because the world was a better and a safer place with you, and it has a void without you. I love you, Dad. Rest in peace."